If you're over 60 and eating fruit every day thinking you're doing something healthy for your body, what I'm about to tell you might completely change the way you look at that morning smoothie or that afternoon snack. Because there are 7 specific mistakes people make with fruit consumption that can silently spike your blood sugar, damage your cardiovascular system, and accelerate aging in ways most people never realize until it's too late. And the worst part? Most of these mistakes are being recommended by well-meaning friends, family members, and even some outdated health advice that's still circulating today. I'm Dr. Michael Turner, and I've been a cardiologist and metabolic health specialist for over 20 years. Throughout my career, I've worked with thousands of patients over 60, and I've seen firsthand how these seemingly innocent fruit habits can transform from healthy choices into hidden health threats. What I'm sharing with you today isn't about demonizing fruit. It's about understanding how our bodies change as we age and how we need to adapt our eating patterns accordingly. Before we dive in, if you haven't subscribed yet, I strongly recommend hitting that subscribe button and turning on notifications so you never miss another health tip designed specifically for you. If you find this video helpful, please leave your questions and video suggestions in the comments below. I read every single one, and it helps me create more content to help more people just like you. Now, let me tell you about Mrs. Patricia Gonzalez, a 72-year-old retired teacher from Miami who came to my office last year. Patricia had always been health conscious. She exercised regularly, avoided processed foods, and started every single morning with what she called her power smoothie. The smoothie contained a banana, a cup of pineapple, a cup of mango, half a cup of orange juice, and some protein powder. She'd been drinking this exact smoothie for 5 years, convinced she was doing something wonderful for her health. But when Patricia came to see me, she was frustrated and scared. Despite her healthy lifestyle, her fasting blood sugar had climbed to pre-diabetic levels. She'd gained 15 pounds around her midsection that she couldn't lose no matter what she tried. And her cardiologist had recently told her that her triglycerides were dangerously elevated. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "Dr. Turner, I'm doing everything right. Why is my body betraying me?" Patricia's story deeply affected me because she represented so many patients I see. She had dedicated herself to healthy living after watching her mother struggle with type 2 diabetes for years. She'd sworn she would never let that happen to her, and yet here she was, heading down the same path despite her best efforts. The confusion and fear in her eyes reminded me why I became a doctor in the first place, to help people understand their bodies and make informed choices. What Patricia didn't understand, and what most people over 60 don't realize, is that our bodies metabolize fruit very differently as we age. The first major mistake Patricia was making, and the first one I want to talk about today, is drinking fruit instead of eating it. When you blend fruit into a smoothie or juice it, you're essentially pre-digesting it and removing the fiber matrix that normally slows down sugar absorption. That morning smoothie Patricia was so proud of. It was delivering approximately 60 to 70 grams of fast-absorbing sugar directly into her bloodstream every single morning, causing massive insulin spikes that were training her body to store fat and resist insulin over time. As a cardiologist, I need to explain something crucial about what happens in your body when you consume liquid fruit versus whole fruit. When you eat a whole apple, the fiber creates a physical barrier that slows down the release of sugar into your bloodstream. Your body has time to process it gradually. The sugar is bound within the cell walls of the fruit, and your digestive system has to work to break those walls down, which takes time and energy. But when you blend that same apple, you're mechanically breaking down those fiber walls with the blender blades. And even though the fiber is technically still there, it's no longer functioning as a protective barrier. The result is that your blood sugar spikes almost as dramatically as if you'd consumed pure sugar water. Think of it this way. Eating a whole orange is like slowly releasing water through a controlled valve. Your body can handle the flow. Drinking orange juice is like opening a floodgate, overwhelming your system with more sugar than it can process efficiently at once. And this is particularly problematic as we age, because our pancreatic function naturally declines. The beta cells in your pancreas that produce insulin become less efficient over time, meaning your body has a harder time managing blood sugar spikes. If you're still watching and finding this information valuable, comment 1 below to show me you're here with me. Now, let me tell you what happened when Patricia made just this one change. I asked her to stop the smoothies and instead eat 2 whole fruits per day, separated by several hours, and always paired with protein or healthy fat. Within 6 weeks, her fasting blood sugar dropped by 18 points, she lost 7 pounds, and she told me she felt more energetic than she had in years. She said, "Dr. Turner, I can't believe something so simple made such a huge difference." But here's what really moved me about Patricia's transformation. She told me that for years, she'd felt like her body was fighting against her. She'd wake up feeling puffy and bloated. She'd have these intense sugar cravings in the afternoon, that made her feel like she had no willpower, and she'd feel exhausted by early evening. Within just a few weeks of changing how she consumed fruit, all of these symptoms improved dramatically. She realized that what she'd thought was just aging, just something she had to accept, was actually her body responding to the way she was eating. That realization empowered her to take control of her health in a way she'd never felt before. But here's where it gets even more interesting, because the second mistake is closely related to the first, and it's one that almost everyone makes. I'm talking about eating fruit alone, especially as a snack between meals. Now, I know what you're thinking, but Dr. Turner, isn't fruit supposed to be a healthy snack? And yes, fruit has vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants that are beneficial. But when you eat fruit by itself, you're still creating a significant blood sugar spike, just not as dramatic as when you drink it. Let me introduce you to Mr. Robert Chen, a 68-year-old retired accountant from San Francisco who was another patient of mine. Robert had developed a habit of eating a large banana every afternoon around 3 o'clock. He'd been doing this for years because he'd read somewhere that bananas were good for heart health because of their potassium content. And while that's true, Robert was experiencing something he couldn't explain. Every afternoon, about an hour after his banana snack, he'd feel incredibly tired, almost like he needed to take a nap. Then, around 5 o'clock, he'd feel shaky and irritable, and he'd find himself craving something sweet or starchy for dinner. Robert had actually started keeping crackers in his car because he'd get so shaky and hungry on his drive home that he felt unsafe driving. His wife had noticed that he'd become increasingly irritable in the evenings, snapping at her over small things, and he'd often eat a huge dinner and then feel guilty about overeating. He'd tried exercising more willpower, but nothing seemed to help. He thought maybe he was just getting older and more moody, or perhaps he needed to see a psychiatrist about anxiety. What Robert was experiencing was the classic blood sugar roller coaster. That banana was spiking his blood sugar rapidly, causing his pancreas to release a large amount of insulin to deal with the sugar. But because there was no protein, fat, or additional fiber, to slow down the absorption, the insulin would overshoot, causing his blood sugar to crash below where it started. This crash was causing the fatigue, the shakiness, the irritability, and the intense cravings. Your brain runs primarily on glucose, and when your blood sugar drops rapidly, your brain sends out emergency signals that manifest as anxiety, irritability, confusion, and intense hunger. When I explained this to Robert and suggested he pair his afternoon fruit with a handful of nuts or a piece of cheese, he was skeptical. He said, "Won't that just add more calories? I'm trying to watch my weight." And yes, technically it does add calories, but here's what happens. The protein and fat slow down the sugar absorption, preventing the spike and subsequent crash. Your body processes the energy more steadily, you feel satisfied longer, and you don't get those intense cravings that lead to overeating later. The small amount of extra calories from the nuts or cheese is more than offset by the reduction in overall food intake because you're not constantly fighting cravings and hunger. Within 2 weeks, Robert reported that his afternoon energy slump had disappeared completely and he'd actually lost 3 pounds because he wasn't overeating at dinner anymore. But beyond the weight loss, what really impacted him was the change in his mood and his relationship with his wife. He told me with tears in his eyes, "Dr. Turner, my wife said I've become a different person. I didn't realize how much those blood sugar swings were affecting my personality and my marriage. I feel like myself again." But if you think that's surprising, wait until you hear about the third mistake, because this one affects your heart in ways most people never connect to fruit consumption. I'm talking about eating dried fruit or fruit that's been concentrated in any way. Dried cranberries, raisins, dried mango, fruit leather. These products have become incredibly popular, and people think of them as healthy snacks. But here's what happens during the drying process. All the water is removed, which means all the natural sugars become incredibly concentrated. Mrs. Linda Williams, a 65-year-old retired nurse from Chicago, came to my office after her annual checkup, showed that her triglycerides had jumped from 150 to 340 in just 1 year. Linda was confused and frankly terrified, because she knew what elevated triglycerides meant for her heart health. Her father had died of a heart attack at 69, and she'd been vigilant about prevention her entire adult life. She'd actually been trying to eat healthier over the past year. She'd cut out candy and started snacking on what she thought were healthier alternatives. Linda had been eating about half a cup of dried cranberries every afternoon while watching her favorite shows, and she'd sprinkle raisins on her oatmeal every morning. She'd also discovered dried mango at her local health food store and would eat several pieces as a sweet treat after dinner. In her mind, she'd replaced junk food with natural, healthy fruit. She couldn't understand how her health markers could have gotten worse when she was making better choices. What Linda didn't realize was that half a cup of dried cranberries contains approximately 40 grams of sugar, much of it added sugar that manufacturers use to counteract the tartness of cranberries. Compare that to half a cup of fresh cranberries, which contains only about 2 grams of natural sugar. She was essentially eating candy disguised as health food. Those raisins on her oatmeal? A quarter cup contains about 29 grams of sugar. The dried mango? Even worse, with approximately 24 grams of sugar per ounce, and she was easily eating 2 to 3 ounces as her evening treat. When I helped Linda calculate her daily sugar intake from just these healthy dried fruit snacks, she was consuming an additional 70 to 80 grams of sugar per day, on top of everything else she was eating. That's the equivalent of nearly 20 teaspoons of sugar, or about 2.5 cans of regular soda, every single day. And those triglycerides that had jumped? That's your body's way of telling you it's getting too much sugar and converting the excess into fat for storage. Here's something critical I need you to understand about triglycerides and heart health, especially if you're over 60. Elevated triglycerides are an independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease. They promote inflammation in your blood vessels, they make your blood more likely to clot, and they interfere with the function of your HDL, the good cholesterol. When your triglycerides are elevated, your HDL can't do its job of removing cholesterol from your arteries effectively. And one of the biggest dietary triggers for elevated triglycerides is excess sugar consumption, regardless of whether that sugar comes from fruit, candy, or bread. The liver converts excess sugar into triglycerides through a process called de novo lipogenesis. Essentially, when your liver receives more sugar than your body can immediately use or store as glycogen, it converts that sugar into fat. Those fats are then packaged as triglycerides and released into your bloodstream. Over time, chronically elevated triglycerides contribute to fatty liver disease, increase your risk of pancreatitis, and significantly raise your cardiovascular risk. When Linda switched to fresh berries and limited her dried fruit to just an occasional tablespoon sprinkled on salads, her triglycerides dropped by 60 points in 3 months. She told me, "I had no idea something that seemed so innocent could have such a big impact on my heart health. I feel like I've been given a second chance." Now, the fourth mistake is something that's going to surprise many of you, because it goes against what we've been told about fruit for decades. I'm talking about eating tropical fruits in large quantities. Mangoes, pineapples, papayas. These fruits are delicious. They're packed with vitamins, but they're also extremely high in natural sugars, and they have a very high glycemic load. Mr. James Martinez, a 70-year-old retired construction worker from Houston, loved his tropical fruits. After retiring, he and his wife had started taking winter vacations to Mexico, and he'd fallen in love with fresh mango. When he got home, he found a Latin market near his house that sold fresh mangoes year-round, and he'd eat a whole large mango almost every day, sometimes 2. And he felt great about it because he knew mangoes were rich in vitamin C and antioxidants. He'd often joke with his wife that he was getting his daily dose of sunshine from those mangoes. But during his annual physical, his doctor noticed that his hemoglobin A1C, which is a 3-month average of blood sugar levels, had crept up from 5.6 to 6.2, moving him from normal into the pre-diabetic range. His doctor also noted that his waist circumference had increased by 3 inches, despite James maintaining his regular walking routine. James was devastated. He didn't eat desserts, he rarely drank alcohol, he'd given up his beloved beer years ago, and he exercised regularly by walking 3 miles every morning. How could he be pre-diabetic? He'd seen what diabetes had done to his older brother, who'd lost his leg to complications, and he'd sworn it would never happen to him. When we sat down and went through his diet in detail, the mango consumption was the red flag. A large mango can contain up to 50 grams of sugar. If James was eating 1 or 2 per day, he was consuming the equivalent of several candy bars worth of sugar just from fruit. But beyond just the sugar content, tropical fruits like mango and pineapple also have a high glycemic index, meaning they cause rapid and significant spikes in blood sugar. Pineapple, for example, has a glycemic index of 59, which is considered moderate to high. For context, table sugar has a glycemic index of 65. When you eat these fruits in large quantities, especially on an empty stomach, you're putting tremendous stress on your pancreas and liver. As we age, our cells become less sensitive to insulin. This is a natural part of the aging process, but it means we need to be much more careful about sugar intake, even natural sugar from fruit. Starting around age 40, insulin sensitivity begins to decline at a rate of about 1% per year. By the time you're 70, your cells may be 30% less responsive to insulin than they were in your 40s. This doesn't mean you're destined to develop diabetes, but it does mean you need to be more strategic about carbohydrate and sugar intake. I'm not saying you should never eat tropical fruits, but if you're over 60, you need to be strategic. A few slices of mango as part of a balanced meal is very different from eating an entire mango as a snack. Think of it this way. Enjoy tropical fruits as an occasional treat, like you would a dessert, rather than as a daily staple. When James reduced his tropical fruit intake and focused on lower sugar options like berries, his A1C dropped back into the normal range within 4 months. He told me, "I still enjoy mango when I'm on vacation, but now I treat it like a dessert, not a health food. And honestly, because I eat it less often, I appreciate it more when I do have it." The fifth mistake might be the most common one I see in my practice, and it's timing related. I'm talking about eating fruit late at night, especially as a dessert or evening snack. Now, you might be thinking this sounds harmless. After all, fruit is still better than ice cream or cookies, right? While that's technically true, eating fruit at night, especially if you're over 60, can wreak havoc on your blood sugar regulation and interfere with your sleep quality. Mrs. Dorothy Sanders, a 69-year-old retired librarian from Boston, had developed a nightly ritual. After dinner, usually around 8 or 9 at night, she'd have a bowl of grapes while reading or watching television. She thought this was a healthy alternative to the desserts she used to eat. She'd typically eat about a cup to a cup and a half of grapes, sometimes more if she was really engrossed in her book or show. But Dorothy had been struggling with sleep problems for months. She'd fall asleep fine, but she'd wake up around 2 or 3 in the morning, feeling anxious and alert with her heart racing, and she'd have trouble falling back asleep. She'd tried everything: melatonin, chamomile tea, meditation apps, new pillows, but nothing seemed to help consistently. She'd wake up exhausted, struggle through her day, and the cycle would repeat. Her daughter had suggested she see a sleep specialist, and Dorothy was considering it, but she wanted to talk to me first about whether there might be a physical cause. What Dorothy didn't know was that her evening fruit habit was likely contributing to her sleep disruption. Here's what happens. When you eat fruit, especially higher sugar fruits like grapes, in the evening, your blood sugar spikes right before bed. Your body releases insulin to handle this sugar, but by the middle of the night, after several hours of fasting while you sleep, your blood sugar can drop too low, triggering the release of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline to bring it back up. These stress hormones are part of what's called the counter-regulatory response. They're designed to protect you from dangerously low blood sugar, but they also wake you up, increase your heart rate, and make you feel anxious and alert. This is actually the same mechanism that helps protect diabetics from dying in their sleep from low blood sugar. But in non-diabetics, eating high sugar foods before bed, it can create unnecessary sleep disruption. Your body is essentially waking you up to protect you from a blood sugar problem that you created by eating fruit before bed. After I explained this to Dorothy, she was skeptical but willing to try anything to improve her sleep. I suggested she stop eating anything, including fruit, at least 2 to 3 hours before bedtime. If she really wanted something sweet in the evening, I recommended she have it earlier, right after dinner, and paired with some protein like a few nuts. Within 2 weeks, Dorothy called me excited. She said, "Dr. Turner, I'm sleeping through the night for the first time in months. I wake up feeling actually refreshed. I can't believe something so simple made such a difference." But this leads me to the sixth mistake, and this one is particularly dangerous for people with any history of heart disease or metabolic issues. I'm talking about not considering your total daily fruit intake across all meals and snacks. Many of my patients will proudly tell me they've cut back on desserts and processed foods, and they're eating more fruit. But when I ask them to actually track how much fruit they're consuming over the course of a day, they're shocked. Mr. George Thompson, a 73-year-old retired engineer from Seattle, was one of these patients. George had survived a heart attack 3 years prior, and he was determined to do everything right. After his heart attack, his cardiologist had told him to eat more fruits and vegetables, exercise regularly, and reduce stress. George took this advice very seriously. He'd have a banana with his oatmeal at breakfast, an apple mid-morning, berries with his lunch salad, another piece of fruit in the afternoon, and often some melon after dinner. When I asked him to count it up, he was eating 5 to 6 servings of fruit per day, which translates to roughly 100 to 150 grams of sugar just from fruit. For someone with George's history, this was problematic. The constant influx of sugar, even natural sugar from fruit, was keeping his insulin levels chronically elevated, promoting inflammation and making it harder for his body to burn stored fat for energy. His weight had plateaued despite his exercise routine. He was stuck at 20 pounds above his ideal weight, and his cardiologist had mentioned that his inflammatory markers, specifically his high sensitivity C reactive protein, were higher than they'd like to see in someone with his cardiac history. George was also noticing that despite eating what he thought was a very healthy diet, he never felt truly satisfied. He was always thinking about his next meal or snack, and he'd often feel hungry just an hour or two after eating. This constant hunger was frustrating and demoralizing. He felt like his body wasn't cooperating with his efforts to be healthy. When we reduced George's fruit intake to 2 servings per day, strategically timed and always paired with protein or fat, something remarkable happened. Within 8 weeks, he lost 12 pounds, without changing anything else in his diet or exercise routine. His inflammatory markers improved significantly, his energy levels increased, and he told me he felt more mentally clear than he had in years. Most importantly, he stopped feeling constantly hungry. He said, "I thought I was being so healthy eating all that fruit. I never realized more isn't always better. Now I actually feel satisfied after meals, and I'm not obsessing about food all day." Now, if you're still with me and these insights are resonating, comment "helpful" below so I know this information is valuable to you. Because what I'm about to share is the seventh mistake ties everything together, and it's the one that most people, including many healthcare providers, completely overlook. The seventh mistake is not adjusting your fruit choices based on your individual metabolic health and medications. This is where personalization becomes absolutely critical. What works for one person over 60 might be completely wrong for another, depending on their specific health conditions, medications, and metabolic state. Let me tell you about Mrs. Helen Rodriguez, a 66-year-old retired social worker from Phoenix who came to my office because she was experiencing severe leg cramps and dizziness. Helen had high blood pressure and was taking an AC inhibitor, a common blood pressure medication. She'd also been reading about the importance of potassium for heart health and blood pressure control, so she'd started eating 3 to 4 bananas per day, along with drinking orange juice regularly, both high potassium choices. She'd read online that you can't get too much potassium from food, only from supplements, so she thought she was being safe. What Helen didn't know was that ACE inhibitors can cause your body to retain potassium. And when you combine that medication with a very high potassium diet, you can develop hyperkalemia, which is dangerously high potassium levels. This condition can cause irregular heartbeats, muscle weakness, nausea, and in severe cases can be life-threatening. Helen's symptoms, the cramping and dizziness, were warning signs that her potassium was too high. When we checked her blood work, her potassium level was 6.3, well above the normal range of 3.5 to 5.0. This illustrates a crucial point. Fruit is not universally healthy for everyone in the same way. If you're taking certain medications, if you have kidney problems, if you have diabetes or prediabetes, if you have fatty liver disease, the type and amount of fruit that's appropriate for you is going to be very different from someone without these conditions. I also see the opposite problem. Some of my patients are taking diuretics, water pills for blood pressure or heart failure, and these medications can cause potassium depletion. These patients actually need more potassium-rich fruits, but they need to be careful about which fruits they choose to avoid excessive sugar intake. It's a delicate balance that requires individual attention. For these patients, I might recommend lower sugar, high potassium options like cantaloupe or strawberries, rather than bananas or orange juice. After we adjusted Helen's fruit intake, balanced her potassium sources to include vegetables and other foods rather than just fruit, and worked with her primary care physician to monitor her levels, her symptoms resolved completely within 2 weeks. She learned a valuable lesson. Healthy foods can become unhealthy when they interact with medications or when consumed in excess, even fruit. So what should you do with all this information? First, I want you to understand that I'm not telling you to eliminate fruit from your diet. Fruit contains valuable nutrients, antioxidants, and compounds that can support your health. What I'm saying is that if you're over 60, you need to be strategic and mindful about how you incorporate fruit into your eating pattern. Here are my practical recommendations based on 20 years of clinical experience. First, limit yourself to 2 servings of whole fruit per day, and choose your servings wisely. Prioritize lower sugar fruits like berries, which are rich in antioxidants and have less impact on blood sugar. Strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, and blackberries are excellent choices. A serving of berries is about 1 cup, and you can even eat them frozen, which makes them more affordable and available year-round. If you enjoy higher sugar fruits like bananas, mangoes, or grapes, enjoy them in smaller portions and less frequently, perhaps once or twice a week as a special treat. Second, never eat fruit alone. Always pair it with a source of protein, healthy fat, or both. This could be a handful of nuts like almonds, walnuts, or pecans, some cheese, Greek yogurt, a hard-boiled egg, or even just eating your fruit as part of a balanced meal rather than as a standalone snack. This simple strategy will dramatically reduce the blood sugar impact and help you feel satisfied longer. The protein and fat also provide essential nutrients that fruit doesn't contain, creating a more balanced nutritional profile. Third, avoid liquid fruit entirely. This means no fruit juices and being very cautious with smoothies. If you love smoothies and don't want to give them up, make them protein-focused with just a small amount of fruit for flavor, perhaps half a cup of berries. Add healthy fats like avocado or nut butter, and include plenty of vegetables like spinach, kale, or cucumber to add volume without adding sugar. Add protein powder or Greek yogurt to ensure adequate protein content. The goal is to make the smoothie a balanced meal replacement, not a sugar delivery system. Fourth, be extremely cautious with dried fruit, fruit snacks, and any processed fruit products. Read labels carefully, and remember that when you see concentrated fruit juice as an ingredient, that's essentially added sugar. If you do choose to eat dried fruit, limit yourself to 1 tablespoon and always combine it with nuts or cheese. Fresh or frozen whole fruit should be your primary choice, 99% of the time. Fifth, time your fruit consumption strategically. The best times to eat fruit are earlier in the day when your body is most insulin sensitive and always as part of a meal rather than as a bedtime snack. If you're going to have fruit, having it with breakfast or lunch is better than having it as an evening snack. Some people find that eating fruit after exercise is also beneficial, as your muscles are more receptive to glucose uptake after physical activity. Sixth, get to know your own metabolic response. If you have access to a glucose monitor, either through your doctor or by purchasing a continuous glucose monitor, consider checking your blood sugar 1 hour after eating different fruits to see how your body responds. This can give you valuable personalized information. Some people handle certain fruits better than others, and this kind of data can help you make informed choices. You might discover that you tolerate apples well, but grapes spike your blood sugar significantly. Seventh, talk to your healthcare provider about any medications you're taking and how they might interact with fruit consumption, especially if you're on blood pressure medications, diuretics, diabetes medications, blood thinners, or if you have any kidney issues. Your doctor can help you understand what's appropriate for your specific situation. Don't be afraid to ask detailed questions about how your diet and medications interact. And finally, remember that the goal is balance and sustainability, not perfection. If you go to a birthday party and have a piece of fruit salad, that's not going to ruin your health. If you're on vacation and want to enjoy some local tropical fruit, go ahead and enjoy it mindfully. What matters is your consistent daily patterns and habits over time. 1 day of eating differently won't make or break your health, but 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, those patterns matter tremendously. I've seen thousands of patients make these adjustments, and the results are consistently remarkable. Better blood sugar control, weight loss, improved energy, better sleep, lower triglycerides, reduced inflammation, improved mood, better mental clarity. These aren't miracle cures. They're simply the result of understanding how our bodies work and making small but strategic adjustments to support optimal function as we age. Your body is incredibly intelligent and responsive. When you give it the right inputs, it knows what to do. The key is understanding that what worked for your body at 30 or 40 might not work the same way at 60, 70, or 80. That's not a failure of your body, it's simply the natural evolution of how our metabolism changes as we age, and that's okay. It's not something to fight against, it's something to work with intelligently. I want to leave you with this thought. True health isn't about restriction or deprivation. It's about understanding your body, respecting its needs, and making informed choices that support your longevity and quality of life. Fruit can absolutely be part of a healthy diet after 60, but it needs to be consumed strategically, mindfully, and in the context of your overall health status and goals. Remember, the most important step you can take is to have an honest conversation with your healthcare provider about your specific situation. Bring up these topics in your next appointment. Ask about your blood sugar trends, your triglycerides, your inflammatory markers, your kidney function if you're on certain medications. Get baseline testing if you haven't had it recently. Knowledge is power, and the more you understand about your unique metabolic health, the better equipped you'll be to make choices that truly support your well-being. If this video has given you valuable insights, please share it with someone you care about who's over 60. These conversations can literally save lives or significantly improve quality of life. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can continue learning about how to optimize your health at every age. Leave your questions and experiences in the comments. I genuinely want to hear from you and continue this conversation. Thank you for trusting me with your time and attention today. Here's to your health, longevity, and vibrant living well into your golden years.